Afternoon, folks. Just so you know, we are live on YouTube while we are getting settled here.
Go get my earplugs. Wait, what? My earplugs so I can join us.
Are you all seeing the just the slide here, not the presenter view? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. I see folks are kind of trickling in. We'll get started in just a couple minutes here. All right, I think we've slowed down in terms of folks joining, so we can go ahead and get started with roll call. All righty. All right, Ms. Suarez.
Yes.
Ms. Parrish.
Yes.
Mr. Anders.
I am here.
Ms. Mormon. I don't think Cheryl's here today. Ms. Yoakum.
Here.
Oh. All right, folks, we're calling roll, so we can indicate Cheryl is here. Cheryl just joined. Let's see, Ms. Johnson. Kristen's not here today. Ms. Franklin.
Here.
Ms. Rouse. All right. I know Mr. Turner is not going to join us today. Ms. Wolford. All right. Ms. McMahon.
I'm here.
Ms. Howard.
Here.
Dr. Sharifian told me that she will be late. Dr. Steen.
Here.
Dr. Nelson.
I'm here, thanks.
Ms. Wilberger.
Present.
Ms. McCoy. Ms. Cook. Ms. Creasy.
Here.
Ms. Newman. Ms. Wirt.
I'm here.
Wonderful. I think that does it. I will hand it over to you, Shaki.
Hi, I'm here.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, ECAC committee. Welcome to our July 14th Virginia Early Childhood Advisory Committee meeting. Hope you all are remaining safe and doing well. We have an agenda full of updates this afternoon. We'll start by getting an approval of the agenda as presented. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Motion to approve.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly second. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. Hopefully an opportunity to review the May meeting minutes. At this time, are there any comments or correction on the minutes? If there are none, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and properly second to approve the May meeting minutes. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. Thank you. We'll now have Jenna provide us with an update, or Rebecca, on the membership for ECAC. We do have one vacant position.
That's right. Thanks, Jackie. So I think as everyone knows, Charisse Rosario, who represented school-based Head Start programs, took another position. And so we are very excited for her, but we're sad to have her step down from her position on the Early Childhood Advisory Committee. We are in the process of identifying a replacement for her position, and we'll be bringing that recommendation to the board in the September meeting. So the board reviews committee membership updates or fills vacant positions on a sort of regular schedule throughout the year. And so we will, for Charisse's position and then any other positions that may become vacant over the course of the next few years, we'll follow that same kind of standard schedule of bringing forth a recommendation for replacement and having the board vote there. So just wanted to let folks know that we are working on it, and but we will not have a person in place there until the November meeting, most likely.
Thank you, Rebecca. We'll now have a presentation on updates for Virginia's child care transition by Jenna, and then we'll move forward to standard of licensed child day centers.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to see everyone. Hopefully everybody is inside and staying cool, as it is scorching hot in Central Virginia, and I can only imagine across the state. Just as a reminder, when we have a kind of either have update items or we have items for endorsement. Today's agenda is predominantly update items, but a lot is happening in early childhood, and we wanted to make sure that this group is aware of what's happening. We then also have some time for discussion at the end if there's additional items or questions or concerns. But the first item is I wanted to update you all on the completion of the child care transition. So we can go to the next slide, please, Becca. So we've been keeping you aware every step of the process, and this body, the Early Childhood Advisory Committee, is a direct byproduct of the efforts to unify the early childhood system here in Virginia. I'll take a step back, as I often do, just to remind us of the why. We've done a lot of work to move pieces of government, and I think it's helpful every once in a while to kind of come back to the, why are we doing this? And it's more important now than ever when we think of the impact of the pandemic on kids and families in the Commonwealth. But our overall goal, and one of the primary charges of this group, right, is to figure out how we build, strengthen, and continually improve the early childhood system that can, if we can give kids access to it, put kids on track for success. And we know that right now, just under half our kids come in not ready, right? Not fully prepared to maximize their potential. When you think about literacy, this should be math, not match, and social emotional skills needed to be successful. We know when we think about which kids do and do not have the opportunity to come to school ready, that our system is rigged, and that children from economically disadvantaged or low-income households are less likely to have the opportunity to come to school ready. The same is true for our dual language learners, for our Black and Brown children, for our children with special needs or developmental delays. And so we've got to really kind of work together to say, how do we build a system that provides equitable opportunity for all? A lot of our work is on access, right? And we'll talk a little bit today about even efforts being made to use relief dollars to support kids. And then the other kind of key component is quality, right? How do we make sure that these are settings that have health, safety, and learning? All three are really important components of quality. And we know that this was our challenge, in February of 2020, before a global pandemic hit, and we lost thousands of Virginians, and we had tremendous upheaval in our childcare and our K-12 settings. And so really kind of, recognizing that this work is more important now than ever. And that a big kind of necessary step to being able to continually improve access and quality is to unify the oversight. Next slide, please. With that in mind, you look at our vision, right, where Virginia, where all kids have the opportunity to come to school ready, and you just realize that it's impossible to do that across different boards and different agencies and different funding sources. There's just so many letters and numbers and constraints, and ultimately got to shift away from a mindset that's about what's the name on the outside of the building or the funding source, right, to what is happening, in the interactions between our educators, right, regardless of what setting you work in. We think of you as an educator and children, and our infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, and how are we supporting them to learn? That's pretty simple, right, and something I think we all believe in at our core. The challenge is arranging all of that back in, from the funding to the technology to the oversight to the monitoring, right, to the kind of the enrollment systems to make that work for everybody. And increasingly, we realized that it was just really hard to do that, if we weren't unified and speaking with one voice about health, safety, and learning, and thinking through, in a world where there's not enough resources to support everybody, how do we make the most of every last dollar and include every single partner who wants to be our partner in helping kids thrive. And that was made even more apparent over the pandemic. And I know at one point early on, when we had just passed the legislation to move everything, a part of me, right, wondered, well, is this worth doing now, right? Or do you push this off until we respond to this global pandemic and put the pandemic first? And just, I think, myself, as well as I see Commissioner Storin on here today and other leaders within government, just realized, partly is we have to work together to respond to the pandemic, right? And you can't separate how we respond and build back better. You have to do that in a unified fashion. We can't be split across agencies. So with that in mind, if we'll move to the next slide, we are very excited that we're now at mid-July, and we have made another step in the progress. This bar graph should reflect a little dot for 2021, but we went from ideas about how to improve quality and serve more kids to federal grants and studies, executive directives, and listening session, a law. We have successfully moved over oversight of all aspects of the early childhood care and education system to the Board of Education and the Virginia Department of Education, which is just really exciting. So the licensing team, we separated adult and child care licensing, and now the child care licensing team fully sits within the Division of School Readiness here at the Department of Education. We have a collaborative partnership with the Department of Social Services. They will continue to day-to-day with the local departments of social services run the subsidy program, but now the Board of Education and the Department of Education are in charge of policy in terms of setting who's eligible, for how long are they eligible, thinking about rates and how we can maximize child care subsidy alongside Virginia Preschool Initiative, VCF Mixed Delivery, and we now have full oversight of the Child Care Development Block Grant. And with that, as Commissioner Storin and I both will know, now comes with an additional hundreds of millions of dollars to provide in relief funding. But what is good about that is when we think about this core work of increasing opportunity for kids and giving more children the opportunity to have those high quality experiences across our public and private settings, family day homes, childcare, early Head Start, school-based, VPI, and or early childhood special education, that we can do it in a more unified fashion. So those things are in place. Still getting a few bumps out. We've got, everything from getting everybody their IDs, to logging in on on the right email address. But we, all in all, are really pleased on kind of a successful transition. I want to take a moment just to really thank Commissioner Storin, who has led his agency. Change is hard, supporting more than 100 employees to switch from one agency to another is a big deal. It is a significant amount of funding, and it's work, right? To separate the technology, to figure out the human resource issues, right? To think about all of the different regulatory components. It has taken, I think we are up to 5 cooperative endeavor agreements, and many, many times with the agency staff and the attorneys to get this done. But the Department of Social Services has been an extraordinary partner, and really every step of the way helping to assure a real seamless transition. And I think it truly reflects their commitment to Virginia kids and families. They've also been managing a global response and supporting pandemic food assistance and pandemic, kind of rental assistance and other forms of assistance while enrolling more people on Medicaid and all of that. But they have made it a priority to not let the balls drop. And I deeply know on behalf of our agency, our board just are greatly and deeply appreciative of Duke and the full DSS team for making this such a successful transition. I also want to take a moment just to sort of introduce the new early childhood leadership team. So we've grown from, I think we were a team of 1 when I started in 2018 in terms of the official, 1 or for fewer than 5 at the Department of Education within the humanities team 3 years ago to now, roughly about 120, 125 folks, a full division at the Department of Education. We have also elevated several leaders, recognizing that this has to be about more than any one leader. So just very quickly, because they're all on today, wanted to recognize that Erin Carroll is our new Executive Director of Early Childhood, really serving as my deputy and managing much of the work related to quality, improvement, workforce, and the general office operations. Tamala Richardson is our new Director of Early Childhood Learning, really intently focused on standards and assessment and curriculum and all those core components that we want to see in every classroom, whether it's in a family day home setting, child care center, Head Start program, or school-based program. Becca Ulrich is transitioning from supporting everything transition to our Director of Access and Enrollment, serving as our CCDF administrator and really looking at how we maximize every dollar at our disposal to serve as many kids as possible, infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, in order to put them on track for success. Jeff Williams is our new Director of Child Care Licensing, focused on health and safety, and really working to partner with our programs as we return to the field and work with you to keep all of our kids healthy and safe in support of their learning and development. And then Tondo Jeffries is our Director of the Office of Head Start Collaboration, and really making sure that we stay connected, deeply connected to all of our grantees across the state, recognizing the key role that Head Start has for more than 50 years played in serving some of our most vulnerable kids and families. So you'll often see them, you'll probably hear most of the talking from me, but they're the real experts, and will make sure that we can answer any of the questions. And again, just a full team supporting this effort. And I think that's just really important to note. I should also note, and I can't remember whether we talked about this before, but it's certainly now official. My Title II has switched. I'm now the Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood. A real representation that this is here to last at the Department of Education and within the Commonwealth. It's more than this effort is about more than any one governor or first lady or leader, right? But is firmly, establishing this within the Department of Education. So all very, very exciting points to note. So with that, our focus right now, and I just wanted to kind of remind folks of what's ahead, because our work is not done. We've connected the pipes and moved things over, but when we first met with this group, one of the important points we shared with you is that we were going to move everything over as is, right? Because it was we already were dealing with a pandemic, and so a lot to move this many pieces of government, and it would not make sense to try to change it as we were moving it. But we do know that there are challenges remain, and really thinking through, now that we've got things sitting side by side, how do we start to think about alignment and streamlining and strengthening our regulations? And so this fall, we will begin engagement. We'll start with this group, and we'll talk about the plan for that in September, but kind of how do we sort of take a look at subsidy and really maximize it. The Department of Social Services made huge steps, and we'll talk a little bit about that later today, in the last year using COVID-related flexibility. And now the time is in front of us to say, okay, what do we want to make more permanent, right? How do we want to kind of make this program really work? How do we think about setting rates? How do we think about who should be eligible and for how long they're eligible? What are the kind of, what are the core things that we want to achieve in the Child Care Subsidy Program? Similarly, I think we'll take a look at the licensing regulations and really sort of think through between policy and practice. What are in 2021 into 2022, what are the things that we want to keep? What are the things we want to streamline? What are we learning as we think about rolling out the new licensing platform that we might want to put in place as we look at our goal of partnering with providers to keep all infants, toddlers, and preschoolers healthy and safe. Once we've done some engagement with you all, with the field, kind of hearing from folks, we will then bring our recommended changes to the Early Childhood Advisory Committee. We'll seek your endorsement, and then by next spring, we'll bring it to the board. So a lot to come this year. And again, the next step for this group will be, we'll bring you kind of what this plan will look like and how you will have an opportunity to deeply engage, so that you will be very familiar with what we're changing in advance of when we formally bring it to you as an advisory body. So that's the kind of key thing to come. So really, the formal transition is complete, but a lot of work when we think about how do we speak and act, with one voice on health, safety, and quality. And it'll take us really all of this year to get that in place. Next slide, please. So what to expect in the kind of coming weeks and months. So I think the first is taking a look at getting some updated COVID guidelines out to our child care programs. We know, and I heard from our licensing team yesterday, folks are getting calls and texts and emails, right? Like the CDC has been dropping new guidance on child care centers and on school-based programs. I know our K-12 counterparts met with the Department of Health yesterday, so hopefully very shortly to come up with an updated set of guidelines for child care as we continue to adapt, and there's more and more flexibility statewide in terms of COVID mitigation. We're working right now, Jeff is working with our licensing team on how to thoughtfully return to in-person. Right now, our in-person inspections are focused on new programs and programs where we've received a concern, really making sure that, again, that we're not, we're keeping all kids healthy and safe, but ultimately we want to get back into in-person inspections. I think we're already thinking differently about, what should be actually done in person, what could be reviewed, i.e. paperwork remotely, noting that there's been some silver linings to we've done kind of through virtual inspections in the last year. And again, as I just noted, you'll hear more from us in September on your opportunity to engage more deeply on the licensing and subsidy policies. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions before we move on, any clarifying questions. If not, we can hold the rest for discussion. Excellent. All right. So the next item, I want to kind of walk through kind of what this is, because it's a little bit unusual. So normally when we bring things like standards, you say, well, wait, Jenna, aren't these the type of things that we endorse, right, that kind of require that level of endorsement before they go to the board? This is an exception to that, largely because it went through the full review, public comment, all of that process at the Department of Social Services. And so similar to what we've talked about before, this is more of a technical move over of what has already been approved rather than starting from scratch. And I know that that's a little bit like, because I just said on the prior slide that we were going to be reviewing the licensing regulations. But if we'll go to the next slide, Becca, let me explain that these are really things that go back nearly 5 years that have been in motion. That is the last piece of the things that the regulations that we're moving over as is. So this is a set of updates to the regulation for our licensed child day centers. It aligns the requirement for licensed child day centers with what the Fed said was required as part of the reauthorization. And that's the fancy way when they just said they kind of updated the law that governs the Child Care and Development Block Grant. Some of these changes date back to 2016, and I think that's actually when the formal notice of action first went out. So again, these have been multiple years in the making, but they're, due to everything from just the kind of the processes, the public comment, the Attorney General and gubernatorial approval, that it is, it kind of went through full regulatory process. And so these are set to go into effect in September of this year, so in just a few months. But they went through all of this process while under the purview of the Board of Social Services and the Department of Education. Because they were in process when the Board of Education approved the kind of as-is regulations a few months ago, we do need to take this to the board. Our attorneys advised us that we do need to take this to the board later this month just to kind of technically move it over. But it's not the typical process for the board in terms of like, public comment under the Board of Education or any of that. All of that already occurred when this was at the Board of Social Services. So it's, again, this last piece that we're moving as is. And just, we wanted this group to be aware of it so that we didn't not speak to it today, and then you felt like I talked about reviewing the licensing regulations this fall, and then you hear that the Board of Education is talking about it in July. But again, very similar to how we discussed the other regs, everything we always committed from the beginning would move over as is. Next slide, please. As a body, we did want you to be aware of what this entailed. I mean, largely because this group was in existence when this was in process at the Board of Social Services. And so just want to make sure you're aware. It, again, much of this comes from the federal requirements of what they want child day centers across the country to do. So making sure there are procedures for safe sleep and shaken baby syndrome, making sure that there is clear documentation and expectations around food allergies and sensitivity, making sure that each of our programs has emergency plans that are aligned with what the feds are calling for, and that there's just a crystal clear requirement that you're reporting any serious injuries or deaths to the superintendent. And again, these are all explicit things that the advocates at the federal level asked our Congress to put into law, so that we're making sure that's consistently happening across the country. Next slide, please. Another kind of two sort of sets of key changes here is one, providing a little more flexibility to our children who are transient or kind of officially defined as homeless, to make sure that they don't have to have a bunch of paperwork in order to be able to access childcare, right? But that they can be served for 3 months right before they have to give all that documentation. And as well as sort of kids who are in process. And so some immunizations, you can't give all the doses at once, and not wanting there to be a penalty for the kid or for the family. So providing a little bit more flexibility there as it relates to immunizations. The advocates at the national level also wanted to make sure that we're building a more and more prepared workforce. And I saw Angela on here a little earlier. It's something I know Child Care Aware has been focused on for the entirety of their existence, but really kind of codifying that across the country, all staff who are working directly with kids, are completing orientation, have first aid and CPR, so they're prepared in case of an emergency, and making sure that there's annual training, and everything from child development to SIDS to how to care with children with special needs to thinking about medication administration. So just a range of things. And again, the focus here on making sure that no matter where you go in the Commonwealth, if it's a licensed center, you can expect staff are receiving annual training. The other set of key changes relates to supervision. And again, making sure that to the greatest extent possible, and we understand that there needs to be flexibility, right, particularly with all of the staffing changes being felt right now across the state from our child care programs, our family day home programs, that like is to the greatest extent feasible, that you're keeping children with the adults that they know and they trust, you know, knowing as all of us do, that kids learn in the context of loving and trusting relationships, making sure that there's at least one person that has first aid or CPR certified in each classroom or area. And then it requires, it's kind of a little bit confusing, but the federal law requires that all of the states establish group size restrictions. It doesn't say what they should be. The states have discretion there, but says that you need to have group sizes. And so while all of the states, generally speaking, had ratio requirements in terms of how many educators or staff needed to be there based on the number of children, this just adds the kind of maximum that you can have in any particular space. So that's the gist of the changes. Some of these things may sound familiar to them. This is, again, a lot of these are requirements that are already in place in many of our subsidy programs. I think as a country, we've been talking about this for the greater part of the last 5 years, but some may also sound new. And so one of the things that Rebecca, as our CCDBG administrator, and that Jeff, as our licensing director, are working on right now is how do we make sure that everybody is aware of this? We know that there's so much going on, and we're still coming out from a global pandemic and dealing with staffing shortages. And so really making sure that there's a set of steps between now and September to kind of get the word out there, doing a statewide webinar and recording it so you can, again, hear us walk you through what it is, what it means for programs, what they can expect, providing some guidance documents. So, you know, you've always got the actual regs themselves, but sometimes those are a little hard to decipher. And so summarizing the key changes, sort of seeing what questions come up. Sometimes it's like, well, how are you going to interpret this, right? Or what does, you know, when you think about group size, well, what does it mean to be in a, you know, a classroom or space, you know, what, you know, kind of adding some detail there. I think we are working now increasingly to put as many of our documents out in Spanish as well to kind of further deeper understanding, particularly for our folks whose Spanish is their first language. And then trying something new. We've been talking about doing some version of office hours, right? Sometimes there's just a question that you need to ask and kind of a clarifying question that is sort of like the one that you saw in the FAQs, but not exactly. And so Jeff and the team are thinking through how we could provide some format, particularly as we get closer to September 21st, to make sure that providers know that they can kind of call and ask a question and get an answer. If there's anything that comes up before this, centers can always feel free to reach out to their licensing inspector. And if they can't answer a question, they will at least route it up the chain, and then we can make sure that we address it in the webinar or the office hours, or if it's coming up multiple times in the FAQs. So that is the updates on the regulations that, again, went through the full process at the board, under the Board of Social Services, needed technically to be added to the DOE section of the regulations on July 22nd, and then will go into effect for programs on September 21st, with several steps to be taken by our team to make sure that providers are aware, can have their questions answered, and are fully supported around these set of changes. Let me pause here and see if there's any clarifying questions before I move on to our last section.
Jenna, I have a clarifying question about religious exempt. What your changes for religious exempt? I guess I just am curious about the comment that says remove the list of exemptions to licensure requirement. Can you clarify that? for me? It's in the laws, not in your slides.
Becca, do you know? And that we might have to get back to you on that. Beverly, we can take a quick look at that. Yeah,
I don't know
our
off the top of my head, Bev. We'll definitely circle back with you. But religious exemption is part of the Code of Virginia. That's not a regulatory exemption, and so I have a feeling that's a technical change, not like an actual change to the exemption. But let us clarify, and we'll circle back with you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jenna.
that's an
Clark
interesting-
Anders here. I have a
Clark.
question. Today, as part of this ECAC meeting, am I correct in understanding we will be voting to approve these revisions to go on to the next step?
No, Clark, we're not doing that because it's gone through the full process. Like basically started on that process before the ECAC was in full existence. So it's more of a technical update of something that exists. And so, you know, we are kind of understanding of the kind of the general endorsement process would be in cases where it wasn't kind of in regulation right now, but it's something that you all are fully shaping. And so this is more of an update so that you are aware of it, but it went through the full process under the Board of Social Services.
Okay. Okay, thank you. If I can share just real quickly, September for me can't get here fast enough. I've read these updates many times. I read it again 2 days ago just to be prepared for today, and I found something in here. I found to me, you know, for those who don't know, I've worked in childcare centers, state licensed childcare centers for 38 years. I've been in management for 33 years. I consider myself an expert in this field. And in reading these revised regulations, I found 13 things that I deem critical problems for operating a state licensed childcare center. And I found one when I read it yesterday that I had never seen before. It just, maybe I missed it, but it seems like it just popped up. And it appears to be a new requirement that when you're doing field trips, that you must have a minimum of 2 staff on the trip who are trained in infant child CPR standard first aid. And I do a lot of field trips, and I would say 3/4 of my field trips so far this summer with this standard, if this standard had been in place, would be illegal. My school age program is college staff. It's what I did when I was in college. It's college staff who are with me for 2 months. And of course, the kids want to go on that field trip with the teacher, and the teacher wants to go on the field trip with their kids. I'm the bus driver. I have all the training. Myself and my college staff, we take the children on the field trip. So I will speak more on all of these 13 things that I have found when the time is right, but I just want to go ahead and plant the seed that these need a lot of discussion. And if we are bowing to the federal language, me personally, I would like to see the federal language, if that could possibly be made available to us. When CDDBG first came out, I think 2011, I attempted to read it. I think it was 38,000 pages. I zeroed in on the child care language, which obviously was much less. And I started picking it apart, but when you get language that vast, it's tough. It really takes time. But maybe in September, if I could possibly bring to you or the entire board's attention these 13 items that I have found, and if we could then ask someone to then match the federal language as far as, okay, we're having to do this because the feds say this, but I want to see specifically what the feds say, just to make sure that Virginia is doing exactly what the feds say, and not maybe perhaps taking it a step further. So whenever the appropriate time is for that, I look forward to that opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Clark. And I think that's an interesting point there. And certainly what we would want to do, and we will think about this in preparation, is bring kind of a straw man or a proposal for September on, how to get the right set of folks working on this, right? I think there's some engagement that's needed. We'll want to ultimately bring everything to this group, but we might want to create kind of a subgroup, and again, we'll work under Shaki's leadership here, but to think through, looking at what's required. I think also looking at what we know in 2021 about best practices around health and safety, and then, I think systematically making sure that there's a subgroup of folks who are doing this, right, from licensing inspectors to pediatricians to practitioners, right, who are working through these, and certainly making sure that we cover those 13 things. So
if it would be an option, I would love to serve on that subgroup.
Okay. Why is that not a surprise to me? But this is just the last piece of moving over the as is. And I know that there's a desire. The same is true, and we'll talk in a second about Care Subsidy. I know we want to kind of make all these changes, and we had to kind of get the people in place, right? Get that first. But I think we are kind of committed to taking a fresh look at this, and certainly making sure anybody on this representative body who wants to get into the weeds here will have the opportunity to do so.
Great, thank you.
Anna, I do have another question. Can you tell me about any discussions that took place regarding the financial losses that would inevitably take place for centers as a result of the ratio changes at nap time and the first day requirements? And are there any monies that could be available to centers, especially during all of these crazy times when we don't have enough staff and we don't have the proper outlets for these types of trainings to take place, and we can't even get first aid in some cases because of COVID? And so is there any money or provision, and were there any discussions that kind of took into account how hard this is going to be? I mean, I totally agree with the safety questions that are at play here, but they're going to change fee structures for our parents. These requirements are going to change many things for schools in about a month. So I had not seen these changes in any shape. So just have a couple of questions.
Sure. Yeah, and if you'll go back a second to the slide on group size, my understanding is that we didn't change the ratios. So the ratios were in effect. What the federal requirement said is you have to create a group size, set a group size. And if you look at the middle column relative to the far right column, it's a math function, right? So it's sort of like, so again, we were very careful that group size would not change your ratios, right? So for instance, let me give for example, for your infant classrooms, if the ratio were 1 to 4, but we set a limit of a group size of 10, that would mean, oh my gosh, now I need more staff, right? Because I've now changed the ratios, right? Because there's no way to divide, 4 into 10. But what we basically did, as you'll notice, is it's kind of 3 times the ratio, right? So it didn't change the kind of core ratios, which we know are the biggest driver, right? Of it's like, how many revenues do you bring in? And you use that revenue to pay staff, run your operations. So we also went up to 3 times, and we've seen states have gone anywhere from like 2 times to 3 times to more, and 3 is probably sort of right in the middle in terms of what states have done. I know some states have very low sort of group sizes, and some go up to maybe 4 times ratio. But sort of 3 is a fairly moderate approach. If I know that not everybody's classrooms are structured the same, and so we will, if there is a place where group size is an issue and will have a financial impact, we'll work with Jeff and the team to kind of look at that and figure out kind of how to work with folks. But for the most part, when we rolled these out, it was our understanding that most settings, like, we're not putting more than 3 adults and kind of, the kind of the kids that were part of the ratio in those rooms. But again, and the other kind of key place that we'll work on a definition will be around the kind of the group sizes, right? And I know folks have questions about, well, playgrounds, like I let all my after school kids like out at the same time. Is that, violation of group size? And really trying to be thoughtful. That this does not have a financial impact. And again, we did not change ratios so that it would not force you to have to pick between, kind of having to sort of bump a kid out because you had to have fewer children per staff. So that's an important point, Bev, and something certainly we'll flag. Inadvertently, when I was in Louisiana, we rolled out group sizes, and that was something that we really paid a lot of attention to, right? Was these handful of places that had, oftentimes we could still delineate the spaces as separate, right? So it might officially, like, legally be one room, but they were separate groups within that room, right? I know I visited places in Virginia where they have the low shelves, right? So that folks, and those are separate spaces. And we working with folks who I don't think anybody can sort of afford a major financial capital investment right now to sort of put up walls or do things like that. So we're very, very cognizant of that. That's a great point, Bev.
Yeah, and Jenna, just to jump in there, the language is worded explicitly to make it about the maximum number of children that can be assigned to the supervision of a person or group of people. Right. So everyone's building is a little bit different. And, you may actually, your physical classroom may not actually be approved to have a group sizes as large as this, depending on the size of your physical location. Right. So this is just the max number of children that can be assigned to a caregiver or group of caregivers. And there may be some specific kind of differences depending on the physical plant or physical characteristics of your facility. So it kind of to the point Jenna was making earlier, it's not necessarily about like the physical room that you are located in, but it is that team of caregivers and the core group of children to which they are assigned supervision.
And if there are no other questions, I will use Bev's follow-up question as a nice segue into how could we use some of the dollars to help address the challenges that the sector is continuing to face. And so, again, we're new at this kind of the figuring out what is the right content to bring to you, but this is one of the things we felt was important to update this group, even though there's nothing formal going to the board this month, was to give you a sense of exactly the part of the answer to that question, Bev, which is how are we taking these dollars and trying to kind of get them out to programs and serving kids and families. I think you all heard me talk a little bit earlier this year about kind of the setbacks in enrollment that we experienced across the board as a result of the pandemic. So we had under enrollment like we've never seen before in the Virginia Preschool Initiative, in early childhood special education, in Head Start, really kind of a lot less participation. And we'll talk in a second about significant drops in participation in the Child Care Subsidy Program too. Part of that is that for a while programs were closed or only offering virtual preschool. And a part of that is just real fear on behalf of our kids and families and folks coming back. We know as folks are coming back, there are other challenges, including making sure you have enough staff, right, to maintain supervision and ratios. Again, getting our schools back so that parents who are parents of both school age and early child, birth to 5 kids, they can get their kids in care and in school so they can return to work and to be successful. So as we look at this fall, we thought it was important for you all to have an update on where we are. We've significantly increased the Virginia Preschool Initiative per child funding, recognizing that costs are higher for school divisions. And we are excited that of our 132 school divisions, 131 school divisions, nearly all, so all except for roughly 5 are planning to offer a VPI program. We're right now slated to serve more than 22,000 4-year-olds and more than 1,500 3-year-olds. So pretty significant increase there. We have made it more flexible for VPI to make sure that we would be able to support all of our Head Start slots in addition to our VPI and mixed delivery slots. And again, we've got schools, more and more divisions sort of stepping into serving 3-year-olds. We know that in some communities and for some families, the public school option is not the best one for their family. And so we've also significantly increased the number of dollars going to private providers, both through the community provider add-on, so additional dollars that go along with VPI dollars to communities across the state, as well as through the VCF mixed delivery. So we went from just over 200 kids last year to an increase of more than 500%, which is we're calling for 1,500 kids across the state to receive preschool services in basically private childcare, but it's publicly funded. And we've dramatically increased the rate, so it is much more on par with what it actually costs for you to serve a 3 or 4-year-old if you're a private childcare center. So very excited that, and again, going from 9 communities across the state to 45. So more slots in our public schools, more public slots in our private childcare, far more 3 and 4-year-olds served. We're also working really closely with Head Start, and they've got sort of an expectation from the feds that they're fully back enrolled by January. And so making sure that we preserve the nearly $130 million that come in to support our most vulnerable 3 and 4-year-olds across the state. And so hoping to hit that funded enrollment of just over 14,000 kids across the Commonwealth. So really exciting when you add these up in terms of making sure that in public and private settings, in nonprofit, community action agency, and for-profit childcare programs, right, that we have an array of publicly funded slots that are putting kids on track for success. Next slide, please. We also are working on the Care Subsidy Program. So this didn't get a ton of attention, but wanted to be sure that you are aware of that. Even though many childcare centers were closed and reopened, it didn't necessarily mean that all of our most vulnerable kids and families came back to the Care Subsidy Program. And so if you look at this graph, the blue line is kind of the family, because you have a household case, right? So for example, I'm one family, but I would have 3 kids in care, and orange is the number of unduplicated children. What you see is just a precipitous drop. And so you might remember that Commissioner Storn and Department of Social Services did a ton of work in 2019 and 2020 to get rid of wait lists across the state, to get up to a funded enrollment of 23,000 kids, really kind of full gear statewide in partnership with all of our local departments of social services. And then bang, the pandemic hit, and we had a significant drop, right, from 22,000 kids down to 16,000 kids, right? Like literally, sort of 7,000 kids overnight, sort of 6,000 kids overnight just kind of disappeared from the system. We sort of went up and down and then sort of hit our all-time low beginning of this year. And then in partnership with the Speaker of the House and the Governor's office, really look to expand eligibility and are able to kind of get that back up to kind of getting closer. We're now back to just over 17,000 kids. So still some work to go in terms of getting back to full speed, which is again closer to numbers that you see on VPI, right? 23, 24, 25,000 kids. But just wanted folks to know that, across all of our publicly funded programs, we took a real hit last year. And now our focus is on bringing folks back to childcare, back to preschool this year. Next slide, please. And this is specifically what we've done, and just wanted you to know about this. Again, and I was thinking about Clark's question earlier, if we were able, under the state of emergency and through things like legislation, to expand this program. A lot of this is temporary, right? And so we're sharing this today, one, for you to know about what's being done and kind of what's most important around access, but two, to Clark's question earlier about, well, when are we going to get to actually kind of changing and improving some of these regulations? We want you to be thinking about this when we do bring the formal, more permanent regulations to you later this fall. But thanks to legislation and the state of emergency, we've been able to make a set of changes that have helped us bring kids and families back to the subsidy program. So we've made more people eligible for subsidy. One big way we did that is we started to consider job search. So about just under a third of states not only sort of say that families who are working or in job training or school are eligible, but also those who are looking for work are eligible. And that's really important when you think about how much unemployment our state has faced in the last year. And so we made families that are looking for work eligible. And so that makes a lot more families potentially eligible. We also increased the income cutoffs. And we know kind of in certain areas, you know, that wages are improving, the minimum wage requirements are coming in, but there's still families who can't afford childcare, right? And so they're in this really difficult choice between, I'd like to go work, but if my job doesn't cover the cost of care, like I can't make it work. And so increasing the number of families across the Commonwealth who are eligible by increasing those income limits. Lastly, we know that for some of those families, particularly at those sort of upper income limits, that the co-payments were just too high because it's a proportion of what they make. And so also we waived the co-payment requirement for a while under Department of Social Services, and now the State Department of Education is going to pay for the co-pays. So families receiving child care assistance will not owe co-pays through the end of the year. And so that's really important in terms of, some folks will say, well, you know, I'd like to do childcare, but it's just unaffordable to me, and making it really affordable. And again, making more families eligible for childcare. And with childcare assistance, right, this is, you know, you're able to choose whatever private program you want, provided they're a subsidy vendor. Lastly, I just wanted to talk to folks where we are right now about the American Rescue Plan. And the one really exciting part of that is that it requires the states to give out a significant amount of money. And I think ballpark, we're about $420 million in Virginia directly to child care providers. So you all know we've done 4 rounds of what we call the CARES grant. Again, huge thank you to the Department of Social Services from kind of making something up from scratch at the end of last summer to running 4 rounds that have benefited, I think collectively just over $200 million and benefited about 4,500 providers across the state. We are ready to take that to the next level, and what will be this is called this ARPA or ARP or American Rescue Plan, but we are required starting this fall to provide another set of grants. We are looking at structuring them for at least a year. It'll be a year to 18 months, quarterly payments based on your status. Are you open or closed, your license or regulated capacity, whether you participate in child care subsidy, and your location in a high-need community. We are seeking approval and running numbers now, but basically what we hope to do is be able to announce by next month, here's the very simple application process that you'll need to do to let us know. We will make sure we get to all of the 4,500 who've already kind of participated in CARES for, you know, transfer all of the data to the extent possible, and then you'll be able to look at how much you'll get, not only just in one time, but over the course of the year. So again, we're hoping to have that application live for programs by August and the end of August. And I think to Bev, to your point, what we heard when we did some listening sessions with our congressmen and senators was that folks really just appreciate unrestricted dollars and just being able to kind of, if it's a facility improvement, if it's a, you know, increasing staff wages, if it's a hiring bonus, that you needed to know how much you would get over the course of the year so you could plan, and that you would prefer to have as few strings as possible attached to those. Folks will have to certify. There is a little bit in the federal law that you have to agree to kind of to some things. So we'll make sure that everybody sees that. But we're excited. So just again, the 4 rounds before, just over $200 million. This will be twice that amount that will go out to the field over the next 12 to 18 months. And the other relief dollars that sort of sit there, one last kind of point here, we will likely, when we think about enhancements to the subsidy program, be coming back to this group to think about kind of the key things that have come up, right? You know, do we want to fund more kids? Do we want to fund folks at higher rates? We know, we've heard loud and clear, and we had conversations about the relief funding, that the child care subsidy rates are much less than what it actually costs you to provide services. And so trying to kind of get closer to the cost of care. And do we want to continue to do things like be very generous with absence days, cover co-payments, right? Just make the program work better for families. And so really wanting to, because when you think about that chart where we just saw that significant drop in participation, really want to do everything, put every dollar we can to bringing the child care subsidy program back and trying to make it as attractive as possible to all of our private providers. Nobody will ever be forced to take subsidy, but you know, if we could get everybody across the state to be willing to take subsidy, it really increases the option for families. But we know we have to make sure that the subsidy program works economically for our programs. So Bev, that was like the longest question and longest response to a question ever. What other questions are there about where we are in terms of access for the Virginia Preschool Initiative, Head Start, mixed delivery, child care subsidy, or kind of our plan for running the child care stabilization grants for the American Rescue Plan?
Jenna, this is Shaiki. Question about enrollment. So we have an increase on the slide. It looks like there's an increase in the school division serving 3 and 4-year-olds. How's the division handling under enrollment, and where is the data coming from to support the need to increase these slots? And the reason I'm asking is because in several meetings that I've been in the last couple of weeks, school division, mixed delivery, as well as Head Start, there's a major concern about enrollment in meeting current enrollment numbers. And so with the increase in slots, it's raising additional awareness. So it'd just be helpful to know how the division is handling the under enrollment issue in addition to adding slots.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question, Shaiki. And we think particularly, I mean, just for a point of reference, you know, on the numbers we've run for 3-year-olds, right, that we're talking about at least 50,000 3-year-olds across the state who would be considered eligible for at least VPI and mixed delivery. We know Head Start's a little bit higher, right? And again, programmatically, we're serving probably less than a fifth of that. And when you really were to add up the 3-year-olds in Head Start, the 3-year-olds in subsidy, mixed delivery, and VPI, right? So you're like there's you know, sort of tens of thousands of 3-year-olds who are unserved right now. It's a much smaller number for 4s, and I believe just around 5,000 statewide. But we base these numbers on a formula for EPI that looks at enrollment, looks at kind of economic disadvantage. It's a conservative formula because one of the things that we have changed is we have made far more kids eligible for VPI, largely based on some of the concerns that Shaiki noted, that we didn't want to make the VPI guidelines or the mixed delivery guidelines as tight as Head Start, because that could inadvertently encourage competition for slots, right? And so we've made VPI much more eligible. For example, it used to be that only 15% of your slots could be above income or have other eligibility criteria, and we've increased that as well as allowed you to kind of go up. You can ask for a waiver to go much higher than that. And so we've seen a large number of divisions who have kind of considered much more expansive criteria on who'd be eligible, right? So that there's, again, not a, that they can sort of serve more kids, and it's not kind of creating a more narrow pie. So we're continuing to run those numbers, and running that formula is part of the law. We also know that there's just still a lot of fear out there, Shaki, and I think there is a worry about under enrollment. I know that our school divisions now are asking folks, would you want to come in person or virtual? The law requires all school divisions to offer in person, and yet there's still some families who are saying, I'm not ready to come back to in-person education, and that probably will ring true for preschool as well. And so kind of really watching that. We've been working closely with the governor's office. In fact, this month, I should have noted, the First Lady today is in Charlottesville touring programs to get word out there, right, that childcare is back, that preschool is back, that Head Start is back, and kind of letting families know that it's safe to send their littlest learners. And she's been doing that all month, and we will do some version of a back to school, back to care tour in August as well. Just trying to kind of at least make sure that, that maybe kids are under enrolled because families don't quite feel safe to return, and trying to, again, not force any family to do anything, but to make sure that there's a lot of awareness of all of the steps being taken to keep kids safe. And we, lastly, I think we're working. I know we've heard a set of concerns. I was on a phone call today, really kind of clarifying for folks if there are challenges around enrollment, how can we work together to maximize the resources, right? And really look at where there is flexibility, right? There's the least flexibility with Head Start eligibility, but where we can be more flexible with Child Care Subsidy or VPI, so that everybody can fill their slots. Because I said, as before, when we run the numbers, and we've done this both at the statewide level and also looked across the 130 so jurisdictions, there's very few places where all the kids are served. The challenge is again kind of doing that outreach, connecting kids to services, making it work for families, and letting them know that childcare, Head Start, and preschool are safe. Great question, though.
I'm sorry,
Hi,
just one
Jenna.
follow-up to that, then I'm done.
Oh, was there something else, Vicki?
And I'm glad to hear hear you say that collaboration is happening with TOE and Head Start. And I think this question is probably not familiar to you, but I have to ask, down to the local level, and what type of monitoring or accountability is there to ensure that court enrollment is happening, so that VPI doesn't with the wait level of students that serve or has that we can't serve. We know that the collaboration is expected, but how is the expectation from the state level enforced at the
Oops. We lost Shaki. I will wait and see if she jumps back on before answering that question about monitoring accountability. Was there someone else who also had a question? Well, I think Shaki's probably logging back on.
Jenna?
Yes.
Hi, this is Cecilia. I just have a question of with the reimbursement for special ed children. Are we considering for the special ed for the mixed delivery grant program? Different
For the what
reimbursement?
program?
For the special ed children. So for the kids that are special needs on the mixed delivery grant program, I think we were receiving the same payment. Is there changes if we serve children with special needs?
So that's a great question, Cecilia. So we have dramatically increased the per child funding for the Mixed Delivery Grant. We've had conversations with our early childhood special education partners. I think the goal would be for the mixed delivery dollars to be the kind of the core services and to be able to pull in funds IDA through the school division to kind of cover the costs explicitly related to the individualized education plan. That's sort of how it's supposed to work. I know sometimes it doesn't always work that way. One of the things we could certainly think about and is making some enhancements there. I think the other place as we think about the child care subsidy regulations is there a different rate for children with special needs? I know that's another thing to think about. I will say under the changes, the mixed delivery program is one of the more generously funded. And so I'm hesitant to go too much further there because our challenge will be sustaining the higher rate. But I think it's a little bit similar to Shaiki's question. We could also make sure that we are connecting with school divisions to ensure that some of those additional services and those kind of costs are covered because they should be a part of the children's IEPs and therefore eligible to be covered. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Cecilia. Did we get Shaiki back? She's still.
I can see her. Shaiki, are you available? You were kind of going.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically my question.
Oh, gosh, okay.
I'm sorry. So basically my question, I don't know how much you heard, but basically my question was that I was glad to hear you talk about the collaboration with DOE and Head Start on enrollment and making sure we maximize the slots, but how is that expectation filtered to the local level and monitored for accountability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge, right, like as a system last year, that there was far more flexibility than we've ever seen before, right, kind of across the board. And I think that was necessary because everybody was dealing with a global pandemic, but there was flexibility from the feds on the kind of enrollment and enforcement. There was flexibility in terms of things like classroom observations, right? I know for the most part, really reduced our VPI monitoring, right? Largely because we felt like every ounce of energy should be dedicated to kind of keeping our educators safe and keeping our kids, right, safe and supported. So we certainly intend this year, kind of across the board, from making sure that folks are, for example, with our VPI, like getting back to the full 5.5 hours if you want sort of full-time rates, right? I think back to the VPI monitoring, which includes all of the expectations, right, from within the classroom to things like the kind of enrollment and the certifying that slots are eligible. So to what I noted earlier, right, back to in-person inspections for licensing. So it's a balancing act, right? I mean, we know that folks have been through an extraordinarily difficult 16 months. But, I think to your point, we also know that we will need to be back out there to put these monitoring and licensing procedures back in place. And the kind of, again, the monitoring of the Virginia Preschool Initiative will be fully restored next year.
Thank you.
Jenna, can I ask a quick question about the ARPA stabilization grants?
Sure.
Your last slide, that was great news. Talk about saving the best for last. Thank you for sharing that information. Do you know if the application process will be similar to how the CARES application process was? CARES 1 was an actual application, and I know some programs struggled with some technical issues with that. But the CARES 4, they reused that, I guess, that existing application, and centers were just required to notify their licensing specialist that they were open and still caring for children. Has DOE yet decided what the application process will be like for these grants?
Yeah, we are trying to kind of balance, Clark, I think, between learning what has worked well and where there were some challenges, providing as simple an application as possible. There are enough differences with what the feds require for ARP that we can't just kind of just cut checks across the board, right? Which was always would have been, you know, it would have been the easiest way to do this, but there are kind of a set of slight differences. You know, one, for instance, that they require that you at least make this available to closed programs. And, you know, in contrast, Virginia made the decision for CARES 1 through 4 to really focus on open programs, right, and create every possible incentive to reopen. And as a result of that, right, Virginia got 90% of its system open sooner than many other states. So we will likely, you know, use a slightly different platform, but we are focused on making it kind of as easy to use as possible. It will likely potentially include a login this time. I know last time it was very one-off and you couldn't kind of go back to it. And there might be a case where, for instance, we will include an incentive for you to participate in subsidy program with the hope that it will bring more child care providers to participate in subsidy, and you would need a way to update your file, right, and do that. So thinking about this over the course of a year, but our goal is to make it within the requirements set forth by the feds, to make it as simple as possible. And again, but we just have to account for some of those differences between what was kind of generally allowable and then what's been a little bit more prescriptive with the ARP.
When those grants are made available to close programs, is there, I guess, guidance that they need to open to serve children?
So that's the weird thing, is that the Fed said, you know, you just got to offer it to close. And so what we will likely do is adjust the amount so that you could get some as required by the Feds, but that it's very much an incentive for you to be open, right? So that the amount for open centers is far greater than the amount for closed centers. So that's a kind of an example of like how we will adjust what you will get, right? So that we do not want to create any incentive to stay closed.
Sure. Yes. All right. Thank you.
These are excellent questions, guys. Is there any other questions, thoughts, concerns? All right. This seems highly unusual, Shaiki, but we might actually be positioned to end a little early.
How about that?
How about that? I do, before we do that, want to make sure. So, Bev, we will follow up explicitly on your question about the regulation, and Becca and Jeff will look into language and make sure we get back to you. I see Dr. Mann on here. Again, we will give everybody an update after if there's any kind of key things that come out at the board next week. And then there's a couple of things on the horizon, really good, interesting stuff ahead of us in terms of announcements on the American Rescue Plan, announcements on kind of returning to in-person inspections for child care licensing, to Shaiki's point, to kind of monitoring for VPI, you know, hopefully a lot more of us in the field and present over the course of this year. And again, we look forward to talking more with you all in September as we think through what are the right ways to get into the weeds on our child care licensing regulations and on our child care subsidy regulations, as we think through, now that we are speaking with one voice on health, safety, and learning. What changes or enhancement do we need to make to those regulations or to the Child Care Subsidy Program? So very, very exciting things. We'll also hopefully in September have an update for you on where we are on the American Rescue Plan and getting those dollars out to folks like Clark and Bev and others who I know is just, continue just to be a critical lifeline. I've only been counting down the days till my 3-year-old goes back to publicly funded care, August 2nd, but who's counting? But each day I'm reminded how extraordinary it is, and just that the child care sector has responded and has been, and the broader early child sector, including all of our Head Start and school-based programs, have been, just stepping up to serve kids and families over the course of last year. Becky, I'll turn it over to
Thank you,
you,
Jenna.
I think, to wrap us.
Thank you, Jenna. When we get the clarification on the religious exempt, can Rebecca send it out to the entire committee?
Absolutely, that's a great point,
Okay.
Becky.
That would be helpful. All right. With that, thank you, Jenna, for that recap. And if there's nothing else, you all enjoy the rest of your 30 minutes that we've given back to you of this meeting. And we will talk again in September. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.